organizations have this tendency to chase more data when they should be kind of thinking more about what problems they're trying to solve.
Welcome to Honest Ecommerce, a podcast dedicated to cutting through the BS and finding actionable advice for online store owners. I'm your host, Chase Clymer, and I believe running a direct-to-consumer brand does not have to be complicated or a guessing game. On this podcast, we interview founders and experts who are putting in the work and creating real results. I also share my own insights from running our top Shopify consultancy, Electric Eye. We cut the fluff in favor of facts to help you grow your e-commerce business. Let's get on with the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Honest Ecommerce. I'm your host, Chase Clymer, and today I'm welcoming to the show Tim Wilson. Tim is another Columbus, Ohioan, coming to us as the co-founder and head of solutions over at Facts and Feelings. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I know there's at least 8 people that listen to this show from Columbus, so let's shout out where we met at the DAW, I believe is what it was called, meetup that's about once a month.
It's a Data Analytics Wednesday. Been running for 17 years here in Columbus.
Absolutely. And before we get into what I saw there, because it's kind of what we're going to talk about today, I guess give us a quick background in your history in the space. Sure.
So I'm kind of approaching a quarter of a century in the analytics space, kind of cut my teeth in the world of digital analytics. Actually, when I was still living in Austin, which still has a good chunk of my heart and soul. But so I've kind of grown up after the first 10 years or so of my career, I wound up in analytics. And that was in-house. Then that kind of moved to agency world. I've been consulting really for the last decade, for the most part, for the last decade or so. So largely working with organizations, not actually specific to e-commerce, certainly work with e-commerce clients, but work kind of across a range of industries and corporate types, really helping them figure out how to sort of put all this data they're spending all this time collecting, actually putting it to productive use. So that's kind of my background.
Absolutely. And so how we crossed paths was obviously at that meetup, and you were touting your new book.
Yeah. So my book is Analytics the Right Way, a business leader's guide to putting data to productive use. And so the new book and the new company sort of kind of happen simultaneously. And they're both kind of motivated by a similar deeply held belief based on observation working with a number of clients that a lot of organizations get very, very obsessed with gathering the data, collecting the data. And the more data you collect, the more complicated it is to manage it. And there's this kind of death spiral. And the more vendors are out there saying, oh, and add this other tooling to your tech stack. And so the book and the company were kind of a reaction to that we have a lot of data. We kind of have enough. Most organizations have enough data. It's clean enough, and sort of pushing to get organizations to say, we need to spend more time thinking about our business and actually putting that data to use. And putting that data to use doesn't mean go buy more tech or add more resources, add more people to it. So that's kind of the premise of the book, which I did. I'm a co-author on the book. I wrote it with Dr. Joe Sutherland, I worked with him for a couple of years. We met when we were working together. He is, I like to say that he's more credentialed, he's younger, he's better looking, and he's more articulate than I am. So it was kind of a humbling experience, but he did a stint in the Obama White House. He's got a PhD from Columbia. He's the founding director of the Center for AI Learning at Emory University. So he kind of does bring sort of the data science clout to the book. He and I connected so well because we feel very, very similarly that organizations have this tendency to chase more data when they should be kind of thinking more about what problems they're trying to solve.
Absolutely. And the name of your consultancy is Facts and Feelings. You gotta kind of break down that name a bit for me here, because facts are very analytical. It's objectivity there, but then the feeling side of it shouldn't we be letting data help us make these decisions and taking the feelings out of it?
You would think, and I would say I kind of have in the digital analytics space, kind of the my people world. Even just recently, I was at a conference, people I've known for years, and they're like, feelings coming from Tim Wilson, like you're kind of a cranky curmudgeon. That seems weird. So. But the reality is that the way we look at it is we think there has been this over-indexing towards the data, this idea that the data has this objective truth, and there are analysts like to run around quoting Edward Deming, who was kind of a famous statistician, brought statistical process control into the world of manufacturing. And there's this quote, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." And I feel like analysts and even a lot of e-commerce and marketers like to kind of bring that they say, they set up this false dichotomy of, if you have an opinion, it doesn't matter. Your opinion doesn't matter because data is kind of the be all end all. And there's a case where that matters, but what we think at Facts and Feelings, and what I've kind of experienced again and again in my career, is that we do want people's opinions, because their opinions are their ideas, and their ideas and opinions come from experience and creative thinking and thought. And that should be kind of complementing the data. And this idea that if you just hook up to Google AdWords, then your paid media spend is going to just automatically be optimized is this way. It's not healthy to think that way, because it doesn't account for the value that human creativity and human thought brings to the process. So that's really kind of where the feelings comes from, is that we think a lot organizations we see being effective with data, they take their hard thinkers and they're smart people, and they say, we need to tap into those ideas as much as we need to tap into the data. They need to really complement each other and not be treated as like one being vastly inferior to the other.
Yeah. And even going with your Google AdWords analogy, like if your goal is to pay the least amount for clicks, probably not the most qualified traffic. If you're trying to get the highest return on your ad spend, maybe not a repeat buyer that's good for the lifetime value of your business. So like looking at these things through such a narrow lens may not get you the best results. And that's where, the feelings, and even even extrapolate further from there, human beings taking a look at this stuff, not AI, not, algorithms, to really help understand it, because computers are dumb. They only do exactly what you tell them.
Yeah. And if you think about it, if you just say, I'm going to try to outsource my creative thought to the Google algorithm, then that's pretty easy for all your competitors to do as well. So, the advancements of where fantastic user experiences or great marketing ideas come from are somebody who was creative and said, I have this idea, I want to try it out. Now they should be trying it out in a way that they can say, yeah, I want to use data to validate whether it works or not, but I don't want to be beholden to some external technology, which, by the way, is highly motivated to show me that the money I'm spending with them is actually returning results. So yeah. And that's on the AI front. I also have a podcast, the Analytics Power Hour, and one of the other kind of founding co-host of that, Michael Helbling, I don't think he'd claim to originate this, but he's the one who I've heard him say it, that AI will take you from zero to average very, very well. But because AI is kind of standing on the backs of all of the collective data that's out there, it's kind of definitionally not going to be helping you really innovate when it comes to doing a lot of things. So if I'm a, really, really experienced marketer, I can certainly use it. I want to use it for ideation. I want to kind of go, I'm not naysaying AI, but a lot of them, people get really impressed with AI. It's because, look, I went into something that I can't draw, and look at this image I generated. It's not the people who are saying, I'm an artist with a vision who labors over my canvas. and I went into AI and, oh, gee whiz, look at this cool thing that I did. So yeah, there's a little not a rant. I don't want to be like, I'm absolutely
No.
not a anti AI person. It needs to be kind of recognized for what it is.
Yeah, I am going to thank your co-host for that, because I always say like AI helps you go from 0 to 1, but you are correct. If AI is just an amalgamation of all the stuff it is consumed, it by definition will be average.
Yeah. Which I look at it, if you want to have an online, if you have customer support and you have, people, you have a call center that's responding with chat, or even if it's a human being, maybe getting to average at scale is good, because these are relatively low effort interactions. And there's lots of really, really good use cases to say, yeah, I don't have a chatbot on my site. And if I can get one that can provide a decent level, tap into some corpus of information that we have, then yeah, providing an average chatbot experience absolutely could make a lot of sense. From an analytics perspective, I would strongly say be really, really clear on what problem you think you're trying to solve with that, and be really, really clear on how you're going to objectively measure, is it actually working? And that's this other part of AI, or lots of new features that I see missed opportunities, is that someone gets excited about the idea, so they roll it out, and then they'll either themselves dive into the data, or they will come back to an analyst and say, hey, I did this thing. It was cool. Can you tell me if it worked or not? And what was missed was any upfront definition of, what does success look like? How are we going to know if this worked? Which sometimes means, oh, we should roll this out in an experimental way, as like an A/B test, so we can like truly measure the incremental lift. In other cases, it may just be, no, we just need to decide like how much volume, or, a chatbot example, kind of riffing on that, how many people need to actually use this, and at the end of it, report that their issue was resolved and that they were pleased with how it was resolved. And then we're just going to hold ourselves to that. That has to be figured out ahead of time, which gets back to human thought and human kind of alignment within an organization. We're investing in this thing. Why are we investing? Like, what business problem, what business challenge are we trying to address? And how are we going to agree? Let's agree now on how we're going to know whether it was successful or not. Because if we wait till after we've invested and after people have poured in blood, sweat, and tears into doing it, it's really, really hard to, after the fact, say, did it work or not? It's like, well, if we don't have an objective way to determine that we've all already agreed to, it gets really kind of, personal. You don't want to tell somebody like, congratulations, you worked weekends, you were up late at nights to pull this thing off, and it was a technically challenging thing to do, but it turns out it's just not delivering the results we expected. That starts to feel like a judgment of the person, as opposed to saying, hey, we tried it. We all thought this was going to work. But you know what? It didn't. I'm just, and it's easier to say, appreciate the effort, appreciate the execution. But you know what? We all were incorrect on the results that we thought it would deliver.
Absolutely. To pivot a little bit here, when I saw you speak the other day, one of the things that you had mentioned that stuck in my brain was this concept of ladders of evidence. You kind of want to, and obviously this is part of your book, and I'm going to a follow-up asking, what else can we learn from the book? Quickly, like, can you break down that ladders of evidence for us?
Sure. And this is when we kind of, in the book, one thing we talk about, we can use data to kind of measure performance, and that's kind of the world of KPIs. And there's a whole part around kind of how do you set targets effectively and for a KPI and so on and so forth. But there's this other part that is validating hypotheses. So as an analyst, when somebody asks me a question or asks me to pull some data, I'm always trying to get to, what's the underlying idea? Let's translate that idea into a hypothesis, make sure that when we're articulating that hypothesis, and there's stuff in the book about how to do all of that. But we want to have kind of a path to action. If this hypothesis, if we can validate it, or in technical speak, fail to invalidate it, then, what are we going to do? So that's all upfront work to say, what is kind of the decision we're trying to make or the action that would come out of validating this hypothesis? There's a tendency to say, oh, we've done all of that. Now, what is the way to validate this hypothesis? And the ladders of evidence say there's always multiple ways to validate a hypothesis. Kind of the dirty little secret of analytics, which I wish wasn't a secret, is that we never know perfectly, absolutely, if something is true or not. If we look to the way scientists work, when the scientific method, they're never just 100% sure, right? They kind of max out at 99% sure of anything. And so on the business side, it's a similar idea that if we want to validate this thing, we can validate it maybe very, very quickly and very with some weak evidence, which would be anecdotal evidence. And that's kind of the lowest rung of the ladder of evidence is anecdotal evidence. And it's easy to kind of dismiss anecdotal evidence, but the fact is I can learn a lot. If I'm looking at my checkout process and I think it could be better, nothing wrong with me going around to a handful of friends and saying, hey, can you just go through my checkout process and tell me what you think of it? And that's not scientific. It's anecdotal. But if they all say, why do you not give me the opportunity to say that my shipping and billing address are the same? If I get feedback and then I logically apply that, yeah, I thought there was an opportunity to streamline, that's not strong evidence, but it's evidence, which in the absence of no evidence, anecdotal evidence is still useful. If we move up from anecdotal evidence, kind of the next rung up on that ladder, it's stronger evidence is descriptive evidence. And that's the data that falls, from our digital analytics platform, the stuff we get from Google AdWords or from Meta or from wherever these platforms are, these millions and millions of rows of data that we have, and we can build models off of them. And that's because organizations have invested so much time and energy into gathering all this data. There's a tendency to say all the answers are there. And if we just run the right models on them. And descriptive evidence is definitely can be stronger than anecdotal evidence, but it also has a lot of pitfalls in it. Like there are, things like confounding bias. There's sampling error. There are various forms of pitfalls with descriptive evidence. Certainly in an e-commerce context, when we're looking at data collected over time, it is really, really easy to get a strong correlation between two variables and leap to a conclusion that really is just they're both being affected by time. They're both trending upwards and they're not directly related to each other. So that's descriptive evidence. At its best, it can be correlative. It can never be causal. And yet it gets treated that way. The top rung on that ladder of evidence is scientific evidence. And really that is controlled experimentation. So in the world of e-commerce, that's generally A/B testing. In the world of marketing, it can be geo-lift testing, kind of incrementality testing. That is the one place that we can start to get to causality because there's some scientific rigor in it. That's the strongest evidence. And just the point that we make in the book and I've made throughout my career is the goal is not to do everything, get scientific evidence for everything. The goal is not to live on any one of those rungs. The goal is to say, what are the stakes and the scale of the decision that I'm trying to make, the hypothesis I'm trying to validate? And now based on the operating environment that I'm in, which one of these rungs do I kind of want to live on? And how do I actually use it? You live on that rung as appropriately and effectively as possible.
Yeah. And if we're going to look at this kind of with like a e-commerce and like a conversion rate optimization lens, which is the worst term ever because you can
but we all use it. Yeah.
optimize for a lot of things. But like I had kind of two questions here. One is more of like a lightning round. I want to ask where would these types of like evidence gathering, I mean, it's probably got the best argument to bucket them in. Like where would they fall in kind of the way that you're pivoting these things? Like first example would be like, where would like just an expert's opinion, like someone does a teardown or an audit of your website's UX, where would that fall?
That's definitely anecdotal evidence, but there are ranges of anecdotal evidence. Asking my mother to evaluate somebody's website versus asking Jakob Nielsen or somebody who's a UX expert, like those are both anecdotal evidence, but applying judgment, there's anecdotal evidence that has more credibility than others, but that would definitely be anecdotal.
Gotcha. And then, but taking the ideas that come from that and running split tests from them, the hypothesis you infer, then it kind of goes to that next level.
Exactly. Well, that'll take you out to scientific. If you run a split test on it, it takes you to scientific evidence. So that's a great example. Somebody looks at it and says, this aspect, this accordion fold in your checkout are a terrible idea. And here's why, and here's why I believe that with my expertise. And you'd say, okay, but if I change it, it may take some significant investment. Is there a way for me to have like an MVP that I can run as an A/B test? Because I don't want to go down and make that investment if it doesn't really hold up and have the lift that I want. So that can kind of be it's one level of validation to get an expert's opinion. If you say, but this is going to mean I'm going to have an ongoing investment or a significant investment, and I either want to make sure it really moves the needle, or it doesn't make me slide backwards. This may be the case where I want to do a split test and actually really get a good handle on saying, yes, I have high confidence that I'm making the right decision here.
Yeah, I like how you explained there, like if it's going to take a lot of investment, either time, effort, money, etc., to make that change, maybe finding an MVT and running the split test. But if now to the feelings thing, when someone points something out on your website, you're like, yeah, that is wrong. Is it valid to just make the change?
Yeah, absolutely. Like just do it. And that's again, like not, and then I think that in the CRO world, there are increasingly people saying, yeah, that's just a go do. Like the form field validate. I mean, it's a bug fix, or it's just like, yeah, this is just obviously born.
You don't need to test that that's broken. It is broken. You can see it.
The one exception there is if you're in an environment where somebody's going to say it was definitely broken, we definitely needed to fix it. How much did it have an impact? And that's only if that you can predict that somebody's going to say we fixed this broken thing. Like, what was the lift? Then that may be worth considering a test, but that's more because there's some organizational factor that's going to require that you
micromanaging.
Yeah, maybe. Because there are, even with descriptive evidence, there's some it's why having a statistician involved is really useful, if possible, to do a pre-post. We made a change at this point. Now, how did things actually change going forward? There's a lot of messiness in this. It's kind of why it requires you can't just say, let me look at a line chart. And my hope is that I've made this change and there's going to be a big step function that changes. It rarely is that dramatic. So then you wind up looking at a chart and saying, I made this change. I know when I made the change. But if you take something like holiday or back to school, there's a bunch of stuff going on, and there are a bunch of external factors like what season it is that are going to influence kind of the results of what happens. So if you say, oh, I made this change and all these other factors were going on, it's almost impossible to tease out the impact of that change unless you say, I made that change in an experimental fashion. Then it doesn't matter that we're in holiday or back to school.
Yeah, you're going to see a lift the week of Christmas regardless.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what about, I got three things here. So like heat maps, user recordings, or even like paid user testing.
Those are all fall under anecdotal. Those are great examples now. Like, okay, second edition of the book. Those are all really useful. They're kind of painful. They can be kind of painful, some of them to go through, but I think the platforms that provide those are getting better and better at kind of aggregating them. They still tend to be, you can have 100, aggregated heat maps that are 100 users and that's still, okay, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. A heat map may be considered descriptive if you're gathering that at sufficient scale. If you're doing user testing, that's almost always anecdotal, but can be really useful. Most qualitative data is anecdotal. I may be getting, I think that's a fair way to put it. You still want to gather it rigorously, be asking the people who are your, target audience for those user tests. But that was heat maps, user testing. There was a third one. Oh, it's like session replay type.
And I think that's something to validate for the listener. So like a user test is you're like paying a group of people to do things on your website.
Yep.
And I would argue they're usually better internet users that like sign up for these things, whereas user recordings are all the dum-dums on your website using it the wrong way.
Yeah. And those can be, and there's a lot of kind of useful from a data storytelling when you integrate the, we see people moving from this step to this step on the website. Now let me filter that down to people who did something goofy. How many recordings do I have of that? In the recording, will show where they were clicking, and you can be like, why they seem to be hanging out. They're scrolling up and down and up and down. So that definitely is requiring a lot of human observation to say, I'm just watching their behavior and I can only watch one at a time. And if I can see 2 or 3 people who do the same thing and I can logically explain what I think is going on, that is still very, very, very much anecdotal. It can lead to a hypothesis as to why that's happening and an idea for fixing it. And then you can actually run a test to say, does that remove that type of behavior? But So
we came up with a lot of things for anecdotal, and then in the middle was descriptive. Are there any? Where would we find that descriptive evidence in the e-com world?
So definitely the digital analytics platform is kind of the big descriptive data source, and it's data we already have. It's already been collected. It feels kind of really beefy because we feel like we have this truth because it's reporting on what's happened in the past to the present. So in a lot of ways, I'd say that's the most easy to go to because it's got the feeling of the heft. It is representing the people who came to the site who allowed themselves to be tracked, didn't track it. So there's a little bit of kind of sampling bias. There's some people at the margins you're going to miss, and you may have AI agents mixed in with that or bots mixed in with that. But it's so that's kind of the most common data. But I think that's also where the whole industry took a wrong turn when digital came onto the scene. And it was like, oh my God, we have more granularity comparing a website to an in-store experience. We have so much more granular data. And there was a lot we could do instinctively with that. But then we headed down this path of thinking that gives us like all of the answers. But it really doesn't if we treat it as kind of being too much of a truth. I feel like the CRO world, the split test world is kind of always pushing back against all of the gaps that there are in that data. So it's useful. I'll say in the book, we go through some of the kind of most common pitfalls. I've certainly fallen into those pitfalls myself over parts of my career. We've got some kind of examples of showing how easy it is to stumble on those. So, but the goal is not to make people scared of using that data. It's just it's useful to say, again, if my website, if traffic is just generally growing over time, it is very easy to take any 2 metrics and put them against each other and make it look like they are correlated, but they're correlated because there's another factor, time, that is actually causing them to correlate. Even through holiday, even through back to school peaks and valleys, they just keep moving together. It's like, no, there's all this other stuff going on in which they're moving together, but they're not actually related to each other. And there are ways to even kind of there are like techniques for teasing apart the time component and saying, are these actually related to each other? But it still doesn't give you, does one cause the other just because they're moving together, which means you can either run a test and see if they are causally related, or you apply feelings, human logic. Can I give a really strong explanation of why I think these two things one is causing the other, and how confident I am that in my feeling that that's the relationship.
Absolutely. Now, if I go on, I'm assuming your book is on Amazon and everywhere else.
Amazon, Target, Walmart, bookshop.org. I'm going to butcher that. The independent bookstore one.
Well, let's say I go and find your book and I read it. What are some of the other headline topics that I'm going to learn about?
There's one thing that I love to talk about that's the potential outcome framework, which sounds super academic and not helpful, but to me is at the core of some of the ways that help us think about what the data is and is not telling us. Talks about counterfactuals. That to me kind of blew my mind 5 or 6 years ago when I came across it. So there's that. The core of the book I touched on a little bit earlier is lays out kind of 3 distinct ways that we use data. We've talked mostly about kind of validating hypotheses, but there is a lot to just measuring performance in an objective and useful and meaningful way. It's the reason we don't, counting impressions and CPM is not nearly as useful as actually looking at, something like ROAS or actually getting to conversions. But there's a lot where organizations tend to stumble on kind of meaningfully measuring the outcomes of the work that we're doing, that they're doing. There's some misconceptions about data, that I think are also useful, kind of calling out the way that the MarTech and AdTech industrial complex is set up to kind of push organizations to just build increasingly complex data technology, data infrastructure. It's understandable. It's not like they're not evil. It's just everybody acting in their own self-interest, and it's kind of collectively saying, let's all drink this Kool-Aid. So those are kind of some of the biggies, and it's written in a way that's not super serious. It's definitely not super technical. I was writing it with a guy who's a PhD in political science, so we certainly could have gone off the rails. There are lots of little footnotes where he had to put in kind of to make sure to protect his professional reputation, saying what we've described is accurate enough for the point that we're trying to make. But yes, we recognize that, X, Y, and Z. So we've gotten feedback that people are kind of entertained by the footnotes and the tone and some of the examples that try to help people think about data in a productive way without feeling like they have to, get a degree in statistics.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always appreciate when I'm trying to learn a subject and they dumb it down for me. I'm not necessarily saying they dumb it down, but just make it funner to read and more easy. The business adjacent books that I recommend more frequently are the ones that weren't a slog to read. Yeah.
There are also illustrations in it that are all kind of meant to be kind of some silly examples. And that has been very gratifying. People who there's a fellow who I have learned a lot from in the space. I won't name him, but he can be a little hard to follow. He's a delightful human being. He will patiently explain again and again and again. Part of my career has been like taking and finally distilling down what I've learned from him into a way I can explain it to a broader group. His wife started reading it and she was messaging me, and she is a CEO at a small company. And she was like, oh my God. She's like, this actually, things are now made. I've been married to this guy. She's like, and I'm now kind of understanding some of the stuff he's talked about. And I was like, okay, this is great.
Absolutely. And that's kind of the point of mastery is when you can take a complex subject and distill it down for people like me that don't understand anything. Sam, is there anything I didn't ask you about today that you think would register or our audience would enjoy?
No, I think we covered the bases pretty well. I'm afraid if I said something else, I would head down a rabbit hole and undermine any credibility that I've built up over the last 25 minutes.
Absolutely. Where do you hang out on the internet? If I'm listening to this and I want to learn more about you, learn more about facts and feelings, go check out the book, what should I do?
So I am very findable on LinkedIn, even though I have one of the most generic names ever. So I should know this. I think TG Wilson is kind of the handle. or the kind of the base of the URL. I'm on Blue Sky these days a lot more than that other platform. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Check out factsandfeelings.io. That's our site, but I'm pretty easy to find and love to connect with people.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
All right. Thanks for having me.
We can't thank our guests enough for coming on the show and sharing their knowledge and journey with us. We've got a lot to think about and potentially add into our own businesses. You can find all the links in the show notes. You can subscribe to the newsletter at honestycommerce.co to get each episode delivered right into your inbox. If you're enjoying this content, consider leaving a review on iTunes. That really helps us out. Lastly, if you're a store owner looking for an amazing partner to help you get your Shopify store to the next level, reach out to Electric Eye at electriceye.io/connect. Until next time.